Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. My name is David Parsons. Thank you very much for tuning into the show. I have a great conversation for you today. Someone who I've been wanting to talk to for a long time. His name is Clarence Taylor. He's a professor of American history at Baruch College, where I've been a teacher for a while, but also at the CUNY Graduate Center, where I first encountered him as a young, wide-eyed graduate student many years ago. I took a course with Professor Taylor called From Civil Rights to Black Power, and the conversations we had in that class, the readings we read, the kind of take on history that Clarence Taylor presented to us totally blew my mind and made me think about race and American society in an even deeper way. And I hope that's reflected in some of the work that I do when I think about the 1960s and 1970s. Specifically, we read this book called Radio Free Dixie, I remember, about Robert F. Williams, someone who you should look up if you don't know who he is, a significant figure in the civil rights movement and civil rights actions of the 1960s and 70s, and someone who's a perfect example of the kind of stuff that Clarence writes and talks about. The influence of Marxism and communism within the larger kind of politics of radical change in America is fascinating, and it really explains a lot about where we are today and where we've been. And so, I talked to him in this conversation. I finally got to sit down and hear about his years as a public high school teacher in New York City. I knew that he had taught high school, but I didn't know the full extent of his involvement in the system. And we talked about all sorts of stuff, American politics all the way through the age of Obama. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Professor Clarence Taylor. You can find more Nostalgia Trap at nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com. Some of these episodes are being featured on jacobinmag.com. You can also find an app to download episodes on Stitcher.com. The Stitcher Radio Network is featuring the Nostalgia Trap, and also go to Facebook and like the Nostalgia Trap Facebook page to get updates on new episodes and things like that. So I hope you enjoy this episode with me and Professor Clarence Taylor.
But it was a period where liberalism did have some teeth,
When was that?
Well,
I don't remember it in my lifetime.
Well, clearly during the New Deal, liberalism has some teeth.
Sure,
right?
I think that's the era that we all kind of look back to.
Right, precisely, But even, I think, in the 1960s, the Great Society liberalism had some teeth,
Yeah.
These, if not, these programs would have never been passed.
Right.
We've never gotten through.
Well, I think I mentioned to you an interview I was listening. I forget who it was. It was talking about doing an anti-poverty initiative in the late '60s down in the South, and it ended up being like they built golf courses for all these elites down there. And the point he was making was that there were anti-poverty initiatives. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there were federal programs around that stuff, and he was talking about it as kind of like a relic of that era, that we don't have anti-poverty initiatives anymore.
That's right.
That's right. How did that happen to liberalism?
Well,
I think it's a long process.
Yeah, it is a long process. It has to do with, race plays a major part in the issue. Liberals were branded essentially as folks who were giving away the store.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean, giving it in particular to Black Power advocates, and so when things got hot in urban centers, because in reality, lots of stuff wasn't being delivered.
Yeah.
Liberals sort of, drew back, and the right was able to sort of push, this whole notion that what is taking place is that, liberalism is out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And look what happens. You cater to the undesirables, And then cities start blowing up. We have, chaos in the streets. We have all these anti-war protests, all this stuff going on.
Race riots seen as some form of like extortion from the federal government or something.
That's right.
Yeah,
precisely. And so they were sort of able to sort of craft that argument. And people bought into it, and particularly not just the white middle class, but also the white working class. Bought into that.
I think that's a real tragedy is watching that working class kind of advocate for policies that are going to hurt them ultimately.
That's right.
So your angle on all of this has been, or a lot of this has been through education, and kind of figuring out. How education fits into that larger kind of decline of liberalism. But you wrote about the influence of communists in teachers unions.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
When was that happening? When was the peak of that phenomenon?
The peak of the New York City Teachers Union.
Yeah.
Its strength was in the 1930s and the early 1940s.
Uh-huh.
By 1935, the communists had taken over.
Yeah.
The largest teachers union in the city, and there were a number of teachers unions in the city. It isn't like today where you just have one union that's the sole collective bargaining agency.
And at the time when you're talking about 30s and 40s, and the New York City Teachers Union is that elementary school, high school, all public school?
Well, they are representing all public school teachers. They try to represent some teachers in the private schools.
Yeah.
And they attempt to even represent the unemployed teachers. So they try to cast a broad net.
Yeah.
And it's a battle that goes on early on before the communists took over. There were the people who were running the union before the rank and file or communists took over that union, made the argument we have to have essentially a limited group. We can't cast this broad net. We should be looking at full-time teachers in the public schools, and we should be emphasizing professionalism.
Yeah. Strategic plan, it sounds like.
Yeah, precisely.
Having studied that, and we can come back to it a little bit, but like having studied that and seeing the way education is now, because the conversation around education today is around kind of like, well, a business model is being applied to higher education in particular, but everywhere. The Common Core conversation. Is this a similar conversation that was happening, like the influence of business in education, or why was the Communist Party so heavily involved in the site of teachers unions during that year? What were the main issues going on in education?
Well, major issues was going on with the fight for tenure was a major issue. Teachers taking loyalty oaths was a major issue for many of these teachers. The teachers focused on working conditions in the schools. And in particular, they were emphasizing in the 1930s and 1940s this whole idea of do we belong to a industrial working class that's emerging, or are we sort of a set group of elite professionals who should, just be emphasizing things like better teaching in the classrooms. And so the communists took that sort of hard line. We're part of this broader movement of industrial workers that's merging, the formation of the CIO and so forth. And they said, we're part of that. And, we have to look at management as essentially aligned with capitalism,
Yeah, that sounds like CUNY. My life at CUNY, CUNY still has. And going to the Graduate Center, I've discovered that there's this kind of like, strident leftism among a lot of the grad students. But it's there's an awareness of that the administration is aligned with corporate interests.
Precisely.
And it sounds like that conversation's been going on for a while.
Yeah, that's been going on for a while. And the rank and file caucus, the communist-dominated caucus, was stressing this back in the 1920s, the late 1920s when they emerged.
Yeah.
They focused. They said, the reason why education budgets are being starved is because the capitalists simply don't want public education. They want to do away with public education.
Sure.
And it's essentially we have to fight for public education.
Yeah.
And one thing they did that was unique was because they had this sort of class analysis. They worked with parents who they said belong to the working class, and we have to essentially not just focus on benefits for teachers. We have to do something much more important. We have to work as a class and work with parents to essentially fight for education, better schools. We even have to focus on other issues besides just education. We got to focus on and minimum wages. We got to focus on.
It's a much broader political project. It sounds like, but involving the parents. It seems like today we get this attitude that parents and teachers are like in tension with each other. You know what I mean? That teachers are not delivering what parents want, and how did they work with parents? Like, what was it like? Was it about literally educating the parents about what the issues were? How did they get to them?
Well, what they did,
this must have been some.
They never took the position that we're sort of the leaders of the parents.
Yeah, right.
What we're going to do is work in the communities.
Okay.
There
it's
are
a different
already
conception of what the role of the teacher is, in a sense.
That's
it's much
right.
more embedded in the community rather than just kind of like this ivory tower view of what a teacher can do.
Precisely.
Yeah.
I mean, they recognize that parents, community activists, civil rights organizations were out there struggling.
Yeah.
And they said we should be part of that.
Right.
That struggle.
And it seems like the 30s and 40s are obviously a ripe time for struggle.
That's right.
Yeah. The context of it is pretty important. Huh.
That's right.
Yeah.
Emphasizing the Popular Front notion. And so they did. And so
what happened with that? Was the Communist Party was I imagine wiped out after World War II. During the Cold War, it wasn't their influence in the teachers' union is going to be diminished, I would think, right?
Oh yeah, there is absolutely no doubt. The teachers' union, from its start, I should note. I mean, once the communists gain power, they're under attack.
Yeah, right.
They're under attack from within the labor movement.
Liberals, I would say, are sometimes the most voracious attackers of the hard left, like that.
Yeah, right. And they're
the hardest red baiters are the liberals.
That's right. And eventually, the teachers' union loses its charter.
Yeah,
the Local 5 loses its charter from the American Federation of teachers, and they then turn around and join the CIO. But by 1950, when the Cold War really heats up,
CIO's purging.
That's right, it's purging, and the teachers' union is purged from the CIO.
It's kind of amazing to think of the late 40s and 50s as a time when just political activity of the left variety was just confronted and more or less eliminated as a legitimate course.
Well, and this is important, and I think we're feeling the ramifications of this at this this notion. So when I look at the teachers' reform movement of today, it's successful because of what took place in the 1950s. Because the teachers' union offered...
What do you mean, like the austerity and they've laid the groundwork in the 50s? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, yeah, they definitely laid the groundwork.
For a larger attack on education.
That's right.
Yeah.
They, first of all, eliminated a model of teacher unionism. I think that was pretty important, and I probably could have rivaled or, would have been a strong opposition to that educational reform movement. I mean, when you asked a question about parents, you said they seem to be, when it comes to teachers, at odds.
Yeah.
And these groups should be natural allies, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But so it's in the 50s when you remove this broader model of teacher unionism, I call sort of social movement unionism.
Yeah.
You push that aside, and it gives way to another type of unionism, more professional, militant. On the behalf of teachers, getting them higher pay.
Okay, and now it looks like a movement for just teachers.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. Clever. Some clever engineering there.
Yeah, and so what happens? You see in the 1960s, teacher salaries going up.
Yeah.
Dramatically. You see these contracts that have an elaborate grievance procedures and all the stuff that sort of benefits the teachers.
That's going to be met with the backlash later. Yeah,
that's right. But there's very little work going on in the communities.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so 68's an important year. And I mean that's major.
For a lot of different reasons, 68. But why in this case? Why do you say 68?
Well, 68, I think, just sort of represents essentially things blowing up.
Yeah.
This tension between teachers and parents festering for a long time, since the 1950s, since the Cold War period.
Right.
And, we see it, sometimes it just sort of comes out, like in New York City where there's a struggle over the integration of schools. New York City Board of Education issues creates a commission on education. That a subcommittee of that commission, looks at the professional staff and it says, look, it wants to push this recommendation that we essentially move teachers, more experienced teachers, into Black and Latino communities. And the dominant teachers union at that point that emphasizes more professionalism says absolutely not.
Right, right.
It has to be on a voluntary basis. And their slogan is integration, yes. Forced transfers, no.
Yeah, this is the beginning of the busing controversy in New York, right?
Yeah, and it
just, Boston, real bad.
Well, that's right. Boston would take place by 73, 74, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, we're talking here in the 1950s. This is going on 56, and people in the Black community are just incensed by the Teachers Guild's position.
Because the teachers are literally just saying, we don't want to go teach those kids.
That's right.
I mean, the message couldn't be clearer.
That's right. And the whole issue of combat pay, so it's thrown around.
There's that weird pathologizing of like that. You and I were talking about that the other day. The idea that these quote unquote bad neighborhoods, all the code, combat pay, it creates this image, that like, if you're a white person, you go into the ghetto, bullets are going to be whizzing by your head the minute you step off the subway.
Yeah, precisely, precisely. And then they talk about,
and it's like, if that's true, if you really believe that, wouldn't you want to do something about it rather than just avoid that neighborhood? Yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah, and so with pressure, the Board of Education backs off its subcommittee's recommendation and adopts a voluntary transfer plan that goes nowhere. And so, I mean, that's just one incident where you see tension between Black communities and the teachers union.
How much of the teachers union is even Black at this? How many teachers are Black? You know
that's an excellent question, because the Board of Education is not keeping any figures.
Wow.
It's the teachers union, the old teachers union that I talked about, that starts pushing this. Going back to the late 1940s and into the 50s.
Well, the Communist Party was really kind of cognizant of that.
That's right. That's right. And they go into schools and they take surveys.
Right.
And they come up with figures that are just absolutely astounding. 2.5% of the professional staff that's tenured are Black and Latino in the schools.
Yeah.
And if you add the part-time teachers, or the daily subs, they call them subs, it goes up to like 4.5%.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So the teachers union is like pretty much all white.
the teachers union is pretty much all white. Now, as I mentioned in this period, there are rival teachers unions. The Teachers Guild,
Okay. Yeah.
by the 1950s, is the one that's gaining most of the power, while the teachers union, the old communist union, is fading.
Is being marginalized.
But that's the union. The communist union is the one that's going into schools and taking the surveys.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
They're
the
ones
only reason we know the depth of the inequality.
That's right,
existing.
precisely.
Yeah.
And they come up with a bunch of recommendations to address this problem, and then they talk about the impact of this.
Right. Right.
Not just giving a psychological argument, but giving a sort of more political, democratic argument. This thing's bad for democracy. How can you talk about a democratic society, when you're sort of shutting out a group of folks?
Well, yeah. I mean, a guest I just had on this show, Lavelle Porter, made the point about never seeing any black teachers making a big, as a young black male, like it made a big impact on him to never see that, and to understand that the black men are not in that position of authority.
Precisely.
Black men and women are just not in that position of authority, so that's not a possibility for me and not a possibility for people like me.
Precisely.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of psychological, it's pretty intense, and the political kind of flows from all of that stuff.
Right.
But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about where your life kind of intersected with this, because you taught at a public school in Brooklyn, right?
I taught at
high school.
I taught at a junior high school and a high school.
In both in Brooklyn?
Both in Brooklyn.
And when was that?
I started teaching in the late 1970s, around 1978 was my first, 1977, 1978 was my first teaching position. Mm-hmm. Before that, I was actually a paraprofessional.
What's a paraprofessional?
Paraprofessionals are folks who assist teachers in the classroom.
Yeah.
And, there's actually someone at Columbia University, he's interviewed me, he's writing a dissertation now on the history of paraprofessionals.
Yeah, cool. So it's a little bit of like like some sort of internship position. Were you paid?
Well, yeah. The paraprofessionals are paid
because they have programs now like the New York City Teaching Fellows programs. I don't know if it's anything like that.
No, this is different. This was essentially a compromise that the United Federation of Teachers that was the old Teachers Guild, and now by 1960 it's become the United Federation of Teachers, and in 61 they win election that give them sole collective bargaining rights.
Okay.
But they sort of in the late 1960s they sort of work out this deal where, okay, look, I know there are people who are calling for more Black and Latino teachers, in the community and so forth. This notion of paraprofessionals is sort of a compromise.
Yeah.
So we can hire people from the Black and Latino communities. It was education, or at least a college degree, wasn't required.
Right.
Although many of them did have college degrees.
Yeah.
But it gave them an avenue to work in the classroom. It actually also gave them some money to go back and get a degree in education and transfer there into a teaching position.
So where were you in your life when that paraprofessional thing kind of caught your attention?
I actually had a master's degree when I was by the mid-1970s. There's the economic crisis that's going on in New York City. So teaching positions are just extremely hard to get.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. So I wound up working as a paraprofessional, holding off to,
What did you want to do? I mean, were you thinking you wanted to go into higher education and be a professor?
No, I not at that point. I didn't want to teach social studies in high school, or history. They called it social studies.
Yeah.
So that was my objective, but I wound up in teaching as working as a paraprofessional, and eventually the first teaching job that I was offered was in a junior high school in a middle-class white community in Brooklyn. and it was in the special education program.
Okay. And what neighborhood is this?
This is the Mill Basin.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
yeah.
What school is it? Do you remember the name of it? Does it still exist?
Yeah, I have to go back and what was the name of that school? I can't remember. They went by numbers.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You need to get that?
No, it's my wife. She'll call back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is it that that brought you to history and social studies? Like why?
Well, that's an interesting one. I got interested in history when I was in high school.
Okay.
And I was going to high school in the 1960s. And
was it in New York?
In New York City, in Brooklyn. Yeah. I went to Canarsie High School.
Were you born and raised in Brooklyn?
I was born and raised in Brooklyn.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And when I was very young, my family moved into housing development, what they call the projects, the Brookline projects in East New York.
Yeah.
And so we had no high school there, so I was zoned to Canarsie High School.
Right.
And I had to take a train to the school, and after I got off the train, it was a long walk to this high school, in a predominantly white and predominantly Italian American community. So there's a lot of racial tension. When that school opened up in 1964, you had community people out there who did not want black students coming to that high school. So they were essentially out there protesting.
Wow.
So
protesting like signs that say like go home and stuff.
Yeah, niggas go home.
Jesus Christ.
And there were a number of race riots, and I remember one that erupted around 1967, 1968. Black student, white student got into a fight, and it was like all hell broke loose.
I'm sure.
The black students were under siege at that point. Community folks came out. The school was surrounded. The black students had to go to the cafeteria in the basement for safety, man.
And this is Brooklyn.
This is Brooklyn.
See, this is the kind of stuff that like Eyes on the Prize, that the documentary shows you like Oxford Town, right, Mississippi.
Precisely.
And it's like, oh my God, look at what happened in the South in the '60s.
Right.
But I mean, what you're telling me is like pretty much the same scene. Of some of those desegregation moments in the South was happening right in Brooklyn.
Sure.
So I mean, did that obviously that kind of politicized you a little bit?
It did politicize me. I mean, and that in the 1968 teacher strike politicized me.
Were you talking to your parents about stuff like this?
Well, not really. My parents were not political at all.
Yeah.
They were church-going people, and that was their focus.
Right.
But I was talking to someone. I was talking to a high school teacher who had a tremendous amount of influence.
There's always someone there that's going to just filter all that radical energy. It was a high school teacher?
A high school teacher by the name of Mert Chernoff. Both my twin brother, and I.
That's right. Yeah.
Were greatly influenced by Mert Chernoff. Now, I was never in Mert's class. My brother was.
Yeah.
And during that 1968 strike, I mean, we knew something was wrong. I mean, so we crossed the picket line, because this was a strike we felt that was racist at the core. It was a strike against community control.
Yeah.
And the rhetoric was clear from the teachers union that black militants had taken over the school system. And essentially, if we allow this to go on, what they're going to do is eliminate white teachers, particularly Jewish teachers. But there were thousands of teachers, about 7,000 teachers, who crossed the picket line because they felt this was wrong. Mert Chernoff was one of these teachers. And the teachers who crossed the picket line were harassed. Hassel Chernoff was actually physically assaulted by a phys ed teacher.
Jesus.
Yeah, thrown to the ground.
Gym teacher out
Yeah.
there.
Our gym teacher.
You busting up the strike.
Yeah.
Not busting up the strike, but busting up the strike breaker, right? He's like,
Yes.
yeah.
That's right. I saw one martial artist, this teacher, this phys ed teacher,
Right.
kick a black student through a glass door, man. I mean, it was just like, it was vicious. I remember going across that picket line, having all these teachers just cheering and yelling at us,
Oh,
man,
my
you know.
God. So this Chernoff guy, Mert Chernoff, tell me a little bit about him. Like, what?
Well, he was a member. He was a Marxist.
Yeah.
And he.
Is he a black guy, white guy?
No, he's white.
Yeah.
He was white. He had always come out and spoken up for what the principal and the administration was doing to black students.
Mm-hmm.
And what got my attention about Mert Chernoff was when the principal decided, who was a real racist, this guy, a guy by the name of Leonard Harrison, decided to go after black students. He said, we're going to go after students who are wearing hats in the school.
Wow, really? Hats?
Yeah.
What kind of? What's with the hats? What kind of hats were being worn?
Well, black, in particular, black students had the hats on, man.
Because it's like it reminds me of like the sagging pants or
Yeah.
the, whatever. Like you just pick whatever.
That's right.
Those people like to wear, and that's
That's right.
illegal now.
That's right. So let's go after that. And it's Chernoff who
Jesus,
called
man.
him on it.
Yeah.
And so that's what got my
And so
attention.
Chernoff was the guy that said the hat rule is racist.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he sort of got my attention on that, So during
That's
this,
amazing because it makes me think of like these Williamsburg hipster bars that have signs out that say no sports attire,
Right.
no hip hop clothes, and it's just straight up, just might as well put a sign up that says no black people. You know what
precisely.
I mean? Like, yeah, Christ. So so Chernoff, it sounds like is a little bit of or a big part of like inspiring.
yeah, because during that
It's
teacher
like almost
strike,
like you need that figure to give you permission to feel the way you feel in a sense. Like someone else feels this way, and this is a legitimate position to take.
It's well, and he did more than that. I mean, because these teachers, they stepped over the across the picket line, they were conducting classes, and so we can pick and choose the classes we wanted to go to. So my brother and I would always go hang out with Chernoff, and he would give us lessons in Marxism.
This is Bill O'Reilly's worst fear here.
I know.
This is actual Marxist indoctrination
This is
taking place. Yeah.
Right, and we would read Lenin. We read all this stuff. And I said, this is pretty cool. I mean, remember, this is the 1960s, so we're hearing a lot of this anyway.
Sure, yeah. Now that rhetoric was on the surface in the 60s.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
And, I'm not saying Chernoff did that in his class on a regular basis, but, these were unusual circumstances.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Makeshift classrooms and so forth. And so, I started to sort of delve into a lot of stuff and read a whole bunch of literature, and this sort of helped radicalize me, you had the emergence of the Black Panther Party, and they're quite active in New York. You can buy the paper on the streets and so forth.
And they're kind of loosely connected to Marxism in some kind of like abstract way, right? Like I just think of Bobby Seale like in the Berkeley in the 60s movie talking about how they made money by selling Mao's Little Red Book.
That's right.
And he's like, we didn't even know what was in that book. We were just selling it because white students at Berkeley love to buy that stuff.
That's right.
It's an interesting angle on it.
Yeah, and of course their identification with the national liberation struggles going on. So, we started making these broader connections.
Mm-hmm. And where did Vietnam fall into that?
Well, that was also a big issue.
Yeah.
While we were in high school during this time, we actually organized a group, Students Against the War.
Yeah.
And, because of my now political leanings, we sort of brought this sort of Marxist interpretation to what was going on, and that's how we understood.
Yeah. But you didn't ever think of like being a Black Panther, or like joining that movement in a more direct way, or is it something that was just kind of in the air that you felt like a solidarity with in an abstract way?
Yeah, I felt solidarity with it, but I had a much more. I was leaning much more to a strict Marxist interpretation. So, and plus, I didn't necessarily think that the Black Panthers' argument about revolution at this moment was going to work.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I sort of I supported them spiritually.
Yeah. There was also a stylistic element to the Panthers.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you either were down with that kind of culture and that
Right.
kind of like attitude, or I could see just not being
Right.
necessarily wanting to put the beret on, and it's performative in a way. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
there's an act to the Panthers.
Yeah, there is. I mean, yeah, there's clearly a certain act and certain style.
Yeah, and that's what captured the imagination of the
Right.
white left, right? They're like, oh, it is a revolution if we just join these guys. That's what I mean. You heard that rhetoric, right? That rhetoric that like blacks are going to lead a armed revolution right now.
That's right.
And whites are going to support them.
That's right. Oh, I mean, the Panthers were pushing that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, some Marxists were also pushing that
Sure.
argument. But
Did you just take the longer Marx view that we got to wait for capitalism to collapse, or like is that what you? It sounds like you were. I mean, to me, it sounds maybe you weren't thinking of it in this way, but it's kind of foreshadowing your move to academia in a sense, because it's kind
Right.
of like there's theory behind this stuff,
Right.
That it's
Precisely.
not just like in the streets.
that's right.
Yeah.
And I thought, clearly students weren't going to lead the revolution.
Hope not.
No, well, but there was that
Yeah.
moment
Yeah,
where
sure.
people actually thought, students were going to lead.
If you're
this
under 30, you're dead. Or if you're over 30, you're dead, man. Like there's that idea that like the youth are just taking over the entire culture.
That's right.
Yeah.
That Jerry Rubin's thing. Don't trust anyone that's over 30.
Right,
You know,
right.
the notion. And I remember when the U.S. bombed Cambodia. That was my last year in high school.
Like 1970.
1970. Last year in high school, and I remember students closing college campuses, and we actually managed to lead this protest at Canarsie High School and close down the school, man. I mean, students sort of just walked out, and it was this great moment,
Yeah.
But I always said to myself, I said, there's something wrong with this picture, man. I said, the students really don't have the power.
Yeah.
And then during that period, I remember walking. I was in the city, and I just walked into the new school, and the students had taken over.
Yeah. They still do that every once in a while over there.
Yeah, but I sat and I started listening to all these students. They were in this auditorium.
Yeah.
And they were talking about what they were going to do after the revolution.
Sure.
And
It's
something
a
just struck
foregone
me.
conclusion. It's already done.
I know.
Yeah.
Something struck me. I said, are they for real?
Yeah. Yeah. Is that because you just felt like you had like a kind of sober
Yeah, it was a sober
picture
moment.
of what power is like in America?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's, is that when you decided to go get a master's degree in the 70s? It sounds like you spent the 70s doing that.
Yeah, I did. I mean, 70. Well, it was like I had to sort of survive, man.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach high school. I wanted to teach history. But the only jobs open at that moment were these jobs in special education, and so I went through that for a while as a special education teacher. But I insisted on pursuing a further to get my further degrees, where you needed a master's degree in order to increase your salary. And it's, I decided, well, look, if I got to take courses, I might as well take them in something I like. So I took them in history.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. That's how I felt too.
Yeah. And then I ran into, I took a course with a professor, Hans Louis Dreyfus, at Brooklyn College. He just died a few years ago. And he was sort of a liberal guy, but, Cold War liberal,
Sure.
But he somehow, something about me sort of struck him, and he came to me and said, look, Mr. Taylor, he always called me. He said, why don't you pursue a principalship? You're a very bright guy. I said, no, I'm not interested in that route. He said, well, then maybe you should pursue a PhD in history. And I said, well, I never thought of that, but that sounds interesting. He said, put your application in at the graduate school. And sure enough, I did. I had to go on an interview. I mean,
wow.
And the next thing I knew, I was accepted into the PhD program there.
At the CUNY Graduate Center?
At the CUNY Graduate Center.
Yeah. This would be the older Graduate Center at the 42nd Street?
At 42nd Street.
Yeah, okay.
And, I took a class in Russian history. I remember I was going to take a class with Eric Fona, who was teaching there, but then I decided, his class was too early, so I didn't. And then the following year, Eric had left and gone to Columbia.
That's right.
So I said, I'll take his class with this guy, Herb Gutman.
Yeah. Here's a name that's come up on the podcast before.
All right.
Yeah, this is an important figure, Herb Gutman.
One of the most important figures in my life, man.
Yeah.
And I was just like mesmerized by Herb Gutman's class and his attempt to sort of rework American history by having more focus on the American working class.
Yeah.
And so I said, man, I'm sticking with this guy.
It sounds like, is Gutman a Marxist? He's at least informed by it.
Yes, he's clearly informed by.
It seems like that his work would have resonated with you with all those experiences coming out of what you saw in high school, and the kind of like what we talked about, like the limits of power in America, etc.
Precisely.
Gutman's kind of like going to explain that in a way that makes sense.
That's right.
Yeah.
And like I say, his focus on the American working class was this. I said, okay, this is the stuff I really want to study.
Didn't he do mostly 19th century? I mean, he's famous for writing about the slave family.
That's right. The slave, the black family and slavery and freedom.
That's right.
That's the big book that the Gutman wrote.
Which overturned the whole paternalist bullshit.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember that from my orals, but also just from. It's kind of a big turn in the historiography of slavery, right?
Yes, it is. It's a major turn. Yeah. It's a major turn. It's a big challenge to Eugene Genovese's work.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
The time on the cross stuff.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Engel and Fogel's book, Time. Yeah, Time.
Historians still cite that stuff. You know that? Like they still cite that old stuff. They're like, oh, slaves weren't whipped that much. Look at these numbers. And it's just,
I know.
Like you're still bringing that up. Thought we were over that argument.
Well, yeah, we should, because Gutman, destroyed
it. Yeah,
destroyed that in a small book called "Slavery in the Numbers Game."
Yes. That one's just amazing.
Yeah,
in terms of being like a combative scholar, but also someone that just has the facts.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
awesome stuff. So you got to sit in a room with this guy.
Yes, sitting in a room with him, and and all these graduate students sort of vying for Gutman to work with. And,
right. He was popular.
He was extremely popular.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what struck me about Gutman, because I took a course with Hans Louis Dreyfus. I took a course with this guy, Abraham Asher, who was the Russian historian.
Mm-hmm.
And, you would get 8, 10 students.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Asher had a few more, but not. The other guy, Dreyfus would have, maybe 8, 10 students in the class. And then I walked into Gutman's class. There were like 30 students.
Yeah.
I said, wow, I've never seen a graduate class this big, man.
So was he charismatic? Was there something about him?
Yes.
Yeah. I wondered, because everyone that I talked to that had contact with him just raves about him.
Yeah.
Were you coming to a focus at that point in terms of what you wanted to study?
Well, I mean, at that point, I wasn't, know. But I was just like so caught up in what was going on, the big debates, in history, the whole focus on working class history, because this is now where working class history, or so-called labor history, is at its height.
Is it the late 70s or mid 70s?
This is in the 1980s.
Okay.
70s, late 70s, 1980s.
Because that's when that's when Reagan takes over. I'm just thinking about like in terms of labor. When I think of the decline of labor in this country, I think of Reagan as the kind of like dark emperor that comes and kind of solidifies all that anti-labor stuff.
Right.
With the Patco strike is obviously the big example, but
that's right.
It was was that part of the context of what you were? Did you feel like we're studying this at a time that shit's going down?
Well, yeah. I mean, it gives us a sort of better understanding of why we wound up in that period. In the 1980s.
Yeah.
And, as Gutman always said, the past is, is just, you got to look at it as struggles, man. And no one's know what the outcome is going to be. Man.
Right. Yeah. Like the fight's always the same in some respects.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. No, I can see that. That kind of makes me think about what you were talking about, seeing the students at the new school. It's kind of like you need a context here.
Right.
That like this idea that we just won the revolution because we gathered in the cafeteria, kind of ignores the larger historical context of like we're not done here. With this struggle until capitalism's over.
Yeah, they don't understand power. It's just absolutely just mind-boggling to think that students like held power. I said, it's a joke. And then, that the riot takes place, or the attack takes place on Wall Street. I was down there. When the so-called hard hats.
The hard hat riot.
Right.
Yeah.
And
there's a book from someone I'm interviewing, Hippies, Hard Hats, and Hawks, Penny Lewis. She's someone who just graduated from the Graduate Center. She wrote a book about the hard hat riot.
Okay.
And it's just about all the mythology that's around that like, oh, look, the working class hates the left.
Yeah.
So can you tell me, you were down there for that? Did you get hit by a construction worker?
I was running, man. I was just and I just could not believe, and I saw cops just sort of like laughing and they're off on the side, And I said, well, there it is, man.
What a weird and ugly culture
power,
in the city at that time. It just seems... And public opinion is being manipulated as well. Is that something that you were noticing at the time, that like that the media is kind of like positioning unions and starting to position the working class as this kind of...
I didn't see it so much in terms of...
Because they're going to use that hard hat. The reason I say that is because they're going to use that hard hat riot as like evidence of, look, the working class is conservative. The working class is not down with all this kind of like...
Well, that was some of the
left revolution stuff.
Well, that's true. And that was some of the new left analysis also of the working class. And that's what sort of separated it from the old left.
The working class are really patriotic racists.
They support the war, and I mean, big target was the AFL-CIO and George Meany, and
that's right,
right. The fact that he bragged that he never was involved in a strike,
right.
The guy who led the largest labor union in the nation, never involved. So it's just.
Well, how do you kind of get over that? Because in a sense, like when I hear like the anti-union stuff in the media, part of me understands it in a sense because unions have been, so many of them have been so corrupted that that it puts people on the left in a weird position, because you're kind of like having to defend unions as in a sense it's the only kind of institution that's capable of helping people against capitalism, but at the same time they're also institutions.
Well, that's trure, and this is why Gutmans Work was so important, because it went beyond, he called the institutions of labor. Not look at labor unions. What we need to do is look at the working class itself. And not just in the workshop, but also in the communities. And so I thought this was really good stuff. Now let's sort of understand, how working class operate, and for Gutman, culture was a big issue. You look at he talked about working class culture. So, and we saw unions, and I sort of took a sort of Marxist view on that also when it came to the sort of captains of labor unions. These guys were essentially corrupt also, So, we needed something outside of organized labor, because we said organized labor just like went off the deep end.
Yeah.
And this also brought me to my study of the New York City Teachers Union. In this period in the 1950s, the Cold War, it served as this sort of in New York City and other places as this sort of arena where all these big battles are going on, and because the labor was so willing to align with the state, other models of unionism sort of were left out, and so we sort of wind up in this position where labor is much more, labor unions, much more energetic in fighting communism and the Cold War than they are in terms of really going out there and organizing workers and supporting workers in communities and so forth. And so by the late 1970s, 1980s, when you had this rise in anti-unionism, as you mentioned, the election of Ronald Reagan and PATCO, and this sort of attack by corporate America on labor. He said labor can't respond to this. Labor unions can't respond to this, man. They put themselves in this position. To some degree.
This weird. You mentioned, Gutman's kind of like focus on culture. What do you mean by that? Like, how does culture aid our understanding of what's going on with unions?
Well,
when you say like working class culture, I'm like, what is that? You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Because it's amorphous in some.
Well, it is to a certain degree, and some of us were sort of trying to get a handle on this. But I mean, for Gutman, the 19th century is an important period where you have this, reworking, reconstitution of the American working class. In its early stage, it's more native dominated. But by the late 19th century, the immigrants, he said immigrants and the children of immigrants now dominate, and they bring these sort of cultural aspects with them into the workplace. And he said these cultural aspects really serve as forms of resistance.
I remember some of this stuff now. Because I think of the culture of the working class now. I'm like, are we talking about the NFL? What are we talking about here? Because there's a we're at a different moment, and I mean, having studied the teachers unions and the left for all these years, and then having lived through that late 60s moment. I know historians don't like to talk about today and where we're headed, but where are you with teachers unions now? Because and education, because it just feels like that attack that began early we just mentioned that in California this overturned tenure law. Right. It just seems like it's just like a relentless march. It is of corporate takeover and destroying education.
Yeah, well, we're in a very bad position at this point. I mean, for us who support unions, in particular, teacher unions and public sector workers, which is the largest unions. And,
the service workers and things like that. Well, I mean, it's not factory workers anymore that are the heart of the American working class.
No, and
people that work at Walmart and things like that, and
Well, and also
Walmart people are obviously not a part of the union yet.
No, that's correct. Although they have made those minimum wage workers are leading a fight that's really significant. But these public sector unions have been pivotal in terms of their support for sort of democratic reforms. And they're in trouble. I mean, I got a lot of problems with the direction that these unions have taken, but nevertheless, they're sort of the best thing out there at this point.
Are you talking about like the SEIU and like these kinds of unions?
Well, but not. I'm also talking about teachers unions.
Okay,
I'm talking about police officers unions. And
Sure.
also,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. The Chicago Teachers Union is quite militant.
Well, that's a different.
Right now.
That's
Yeah.
right, and that's what gives me hope. You
Yeah.
know, in Chicago,
Uh-huh.
where I think the group is CORE, right?
Yeah.
That rank and file won the election, and they took over that union, and they beat back Rahm Emanuel and some of the so-called educational reform measures.
Yeah.
And they did that by going into communities and working with parents.
Well, look at that. I mean, isn't that the return of the strategy you wrote
That's
about
right.
earlier, right?
Precisely.
Is that is kind of like, I don't know, like but teachers need to communicate in some way to the rest of the community that they're not just looking for
Precisely.
more money, that,
Right.
that they're looking for. I mean, they have to be in solidarity with the parents.
They do.
Otherwise, the parents are going to hate them.
That's right, and we see this. I was listening to NPR this morning, and listening to some of the responses to the judge's decision in California to do away with tenure, and I heard one person come on. She identifies herself as a parent, talking about dealing with institutional racism, and this is a very good decision, she said. And she was talking to Diane.
Yeah, it's being pitched as race, right?
That's right.
I mean, they're literally saying, with the California tenure system hurts people, students of color, Latino and Black
That's right.
students, because the worst. There's this myth. I assume it's a myth, but the idea that like there's just an army of tenured professionals who are not only incompetent but are actual like danger to students, and they're the ones that have been protected by this tenure system. Is that real? Does that exist?
No, that's not real, but that's the argument.
Yeah,
that's
I saw that not even as an argument, but as presented as fact in the LA Times this morning. It's like, well, the reality is we have a lot of tenured teachers who shouldn't be working. They're horrible, and they're still hanging around because tenure protects them.
Yeah. Well, that's been the push of the educational reform movement for some time.
And the educational reform movement is a nice euphemism for austerity. Essentially.
It's for the destruction of public education.
Yeah.
The pushing of charter schools, vouchers, and they know the one force that's sort of standing in their way are teachers unions, and so that's why they've been hammering and going after them.
Yeah,
and so and their propaganda is widespread, and they have loads of money, as Diane Ravitch said this morning. Hedge fund managers are funding this so-called educational reform movement.
Well, she was yesterday identified Bill Gates as a major figure in the Common Core movement. It's disturbing because it's like it's curriculum now. It's literally like the federal government's going to create this curriculum. This is going to with no input from teachers or educators. It's literally like connected to education companies, that are going to distribute their iPads and all their apps. And I mean, it's a dystopic moment when I see that. I don't know if you see. I'm not a Luddite with technology, but I do see that technology is being used as a kind of utopic answer. I don't know if you've seen this Google commercial, but it's like there's this Google commercial that shows teacher distributing all the tablets to the kids, and turn on your math app, and everyone's going to do their math game. And the commercial is horrifying. Literally, as a teacher, like it's horrifying, but it's presented in the most utopic. Like we solve the problem of education because we can just slap a tablet in front of a kid, and have them play with an app developed by a company that is lobbying with the federal government to.
That's right, and that's right, and what they do is they give all that loads of resources to these charter schools.
Yeah,
and this is really devastating in a sense for public education. Because parents see this and they say, "Hey, I want my child to have this."
Yeah.
And so you have all these parents coming out and support public charter schools. Mm-hmm. Some of them support vouchers. Let me send my kid to get money from the state so I can send my kid to a private school. And so this is the tragic moment. This is what we're sort of paying for in the direction that the unions took during the Cold War.
Yeah.
And so this is the sort of connection I'm making, because they had little investment in those communities. Parents would say, hey, the heck with you. You've never been in support of my child's education.
Yeah, sure.
And now I got, I got Bill Gates out there, Jeffrey Canada. I mean, you see that horrible, very well-made film, so-called documentary, Waiting for Superman.
I started watching that because I didn't know what it was. I just was like, oh, this will be interesting. A documentary about education. And about 10 minutes in, I was like, what the fuck am I watching? Because this is propaganda of the dirtiest sort. It seems like it's
funded by the Gates Foundation.
Right,
that movie.
That's what's gross about this. We can sit here and talk about. I know, one of the things that I appreciate about you, Clarence, from the first time I took your course years ago at the Graduate Center was you have a very righteous and pure hatred of the right wing, which is what animated so much of my politics. But what do we do when it's liberals, that are kind of like leading the charge on this education reform?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Like, and the right wing is attacking Common Core too, and they're using it as like, well, this is just a further example of why public education is a failure and why we shouldn't have public education.
Yeah,
essentially,
precisely.
So it's almost like it's a twin
right.
set of problems coming from the ruling class.
That's right. And this is why we have to be careful.
Yeah.
Diane Ravitch put on her blog this morning Ernie Duncan's praise of this judge's decision.
Oh, God. Of the tenure thing in California.
That's correct.
Yeah. Sure.
Well,
I mean, Rahm Emanuel puts it all in kind of like liberal language.
That's right. And so does the President of the United States, by the way.
That's right. Yeah.
Obama does also.
Yeah, Emanuel's buddy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, race to the top.
Yeah.
That's Obama's thing. And, that pushes charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
That pushes weakening tenure laws,
and anti-humanities as well. I mean,
that's right.
Obama was the guy that made fun of art history a few weeks ago and said that maybe we need more people learning how to weld and stuff like that. And
precisely,
it's just kind of shocking to hear that kind of language in some sense, particularly from who I thought this guy was in 2008.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just because he emerged out of nowhere, and it was like, who is this Barack Obama guy? We all got kind of had some hallucinatory kind of like after 8 years of Bush. Thank God, here's something refreshing and real. And I mean,
that's right.
He turns out to be this neoliberal dude.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so you're right. It's not just the right, but a large number of the liberal establishments, coming out in support of the so-called educational reform movement.
You think students could be involved? Because we talk about parents getting involved, and we've talked, the students did have their little revolutionary moment, here and there in the 60s and 70s, but is it worth it to get the students involved? I
think it's very, very important that we get students involved.
They're the ones that are ultimately the victims of this. You know what I mean?
Precisely.
Like...
Well, how do we? Yeah, the question is, how do we do it? How do we? And one of the, I think, missions of these teachers unions is first of all to realize that you do have allies in the community, and what you have to do is sort of win these folks over. Yeah, and you have to do this through education. Yeah, and you got to be in the community, and that's just what I loved about the old teachers union. I mean, they were in the community.
It was they were visible. It was a cultural project. It wasn't just the union. Your contact with the union wasn't just an envelope you got in the mail once a year for dues or something. It was like an actual organization that you felt connected to.
That's right.
And I think you're right. I mean, just sitting here in this hour I've talked to you, I think I've learned something about it, which is the sense that unions can't be separate. They can't be. Because otherwise, people are going to think, well, that union is just in America, everyone's just out for themselves, and that's what the union is doing. And the union needs to communicate that a strong union equals strong society. Right.
That's right, and that's why Karen Lewis and the Chicago Teachers Union were able to defeat Rahm Emanuel because they went out in the communities and they were working for years with parents and community activists, and so you couldn't use the divide and conquer tactic that Chris Christie uses all the time.
Yes,
so effectively.
Yeah. No, he's good at that.
Yes, he is extremely good at that. I mean, the reason why your property taxes are going up is because, all these public sector workers are getting automatic raises, and so on and so forth. And of course, people say, yeah, that's correct, And, I haven't, at this point, haven't seen any effort on the part of Teachers Union in New Jersey to sort of go out there and start working in the communities. I just haven't, besides their annual conference every year, they need to do more than that.
Yeah, no, I think I'm convinced of that, that it has to be a larger project.
Right.
Thanks so much for talking to me.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, I know that it's a long road, and what we're talking about is like, it's not quick victories. It is
it isn't.
It is this constant struggle.
Right.
And there has to be something that gets us to see that. I think it's hard to see that in our from our kind of myopic viewpoint. But it's a weird moment right now because I feel like we're losing so much of the society is just being sold off right in front of us.
Yes. Yeah.
And a generation of people lost.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And it's no easy solutions to this. And it can't just be
especially with the right wing
politics.
Rising. Yeah. Well, okay, we get an electoral politics thing, but the right wing is still like the Tea Party actually has electoral power.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like that, I think that's what's so depressing to sit here and when talk about like. Labor unions and what they have to do, and looking at it from that context, and then like taking a step back and realizing like what is the culture of American politics right now?
Right.
Because we're at a moment where it's just reptile after reptile being put in front of us. And so what do you mean when you say electoral politics are not the place? Where is it then?
Well, but let me tell you why I don't think electoral politics. Because I think Labor's been playing that game so long that and it's obvious to me, to a lot of folks, it's always been essentially taken.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So Labor goes out and supports Barack Obama, and then he comes up with this horrible educational program that's essentially going to have a terrible impact on public schools.
Mm-hmm. And and Cuomo with the Working Families Party,
that's right?
Right? It's just like the same story, whether it be Democrats or Republicans. Taking whatever grassroots energy there is and just kind of absorbing it and ignoring that constituency.
Yeah. I mean, look what he did during the fight over funding pre-K and his horrible position on charter schools. Now he ran out there at this essentially phony demonstration that they had in Albany, and he ran there to speak before them to essentially undermine the mayor of New York, de Blasio. You know?
Well, I mean, they're capitalists, and like ultimately they're invested in making this system keep going, and so the only solutions they're going to put forth are capitalist solutions, and so that's why like they're excited about technology, because it's like, oh, Google can get in there, and Google can make billions of dollars off of giving iPads to the students, and that it's not really education reform; it's capitalism.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that we have to not to give up on it, but I'm saying that we clearly need to sort of rethink how do we sort of approach that. But I think as I mentioned before, you have to educate folks. You got to go out there and start going in the communities and having sort of grassroots struggles.
We need to kill that boogeyman of the teacher that's in people's minds, and I mean, to the point where there was this moment. I think it was during whenever the 2008 election, whenever Sarah Palin was all over the place.
Right.
She was being interviewed, and someone said they were a teacher, and she kind of like it was a big moment because she kind of like had a shitty look on her face when the person said she's a teacher. She rolled her eyes. And it's like this right-wing thing that like if someone says they're a teacher, I automatically know this person is some sort of Marxist that's just like manipulating the system and enriching themselves. And it's a really, really shitty attitude to have towards teachers in the United States. I think that's probably what's most disappointing about this as someone in the profession.
Well, that sort of anti-intellectualism is so widespread.
Yeah, not only that, but like the feeling that like teachers are getting over on us somehow. Yeah. They're stealing from the taxpayers. They're not really doing anything.
Precisely.
That attitude has to be crushed in culture, and I'm waiting for someone said like I don't know this figure Neil deGrasse Tyson. The guy,
the scientist,
science guy. He's really speaking up for science right now, and like really, he's a cultural representative of what science is and its value. And someone said the other day, I don't know if it was Twitter or wherever, I saw it was a great idea of like, we need a Neil deGrasse Tyson for the humanities. We need like a comparable figure that explains to the country why this is important.
That's right.
And why this is a part of like our larger mission as a country. Right. We're not just a collection of individuals. It is a society. There is like something that needs to be done to we have to have a spirit of collectivity in some respect.
Right.
I'm waiting for that figure to emerge.
Yeah, so am I, man.
All right. Well, thanks for talking to me, Clarence. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.